Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody watching our show. And thank you so much for joining us and listen to our, expert story. Hope that we got bring you a beautiful day today. So today we have a special guest, Mr. Randy. Hello, Randy. How you doing?
Hi,
Hello,
how are you,
Randy.
Vivian? It's nice to see you. Hi.
Sure. So it's so wonderful to have you here. And just to kick off everything, would you please share with us a little bit about yourself?
Um, my formal name is Randall White. My friends call me Randy. I'm a social psychologist by background. I was trained at Cornell. Um, I teach at HEC, the Grande École in Paris, and I also teach in the Middle East. I taught for many years at Duke University at the Fuqua School, and before that, I was at a very special place called the Center for Creative Leadership. I studied leaders and where they come from, and my claim to fame, if you will, is I'm the co-author of a study of women that became quite famous called Breaking the Glass Ceiling. It's a study of how women make it to the top of large organizations. And I've spent my life, you can see the gray hair, I've spent my life studying where leaders come from, how they develop, and how they make it to the top of large organizations. So I'm fascinated by that dynamic for women and for men. And I pre-pandemic, and even sort of in the last year, as we've gotten back to being in airplanes, I spend an awful lot of time in airplanes running back and forth to Europe and the Middle East, and sometimes to Asia. A lot of time. Sorry, my machine is going off. I spend a lot of time reaching and being active with developing leaders and with leaders and senior teams. So that's my story.
Wow, thanks a lot for sharing your amazing life stories in about 3 minutes. So it's very short. We're gonna examine it together with you tonight. Okay, Randy?
Okay.
Yes.
Sure.
Yep. Before we get to where you are doing now, we want to bring you all the way back to a very younger version of Randy, where the hair is not white, but it's a different color back then. Okay, when Vivian was young, she wanted to become a singer. When I was young, I wanted to become an astronaut, but neither one of us become one that we wanted to be. So we want to know, Randy, when you were young, what did you dream one day when you grow up? What kind of job you're gonna do? What did you want to become?
Boy, my younger daughter, when she was in Montessori school, came home one day and said, I want to be an architect, and then 5 years later, I want to be a doctor, and 5 years after that, I want to be and I thought, that's very interesting. She had all these different things that she wanted to be. I, when I was a little kid, really little, I grew up in a military family, so we lived in different places. The first thing I remember I wanted to be was an engineer on a steam locomotive. They were already certainly going away at that point in time. And then it's funny, I didn't want to be a singer, but I was a musician in my teenage years. I wanted to play an instrument, but you have to be really good. You can't just be okay. You have to be really good. I also share your love of wanting to be an astronaut. I have my ticket for going to Mars. You see my ticket for going to Mars. I leave it on my desk. And this is a real, anyway, NASA had a thing where you could get your name on the Mars probe. Anyway, yeah, I wanted to be an astronaut. Who wouldn't want to go somewhere in outer space? So, I think lots of kids, certainly Western kids, want to be all of the things the two of you mentioned, and I share that too.
So
anyway, here's my ticket.
Yeah. How's that ticket works though?
Well, it's good for 301 million miles. Those are the award points you get. I don't know how it works, but it has a little code on it. Maybe I could show up. You both know, by the way, since I am a social psychologist, I tease and say that's a psychologist with a personality. There is another social psychologist that is actually working with the Mars team to help them learn how to work well together, because all of that work is very team-oriented, very team-oriented. So the kind of work that I do, aside from helping individuals try to make it to the top of large organizations, is also helping people on senior teams learn how to work well together. Or, if you will, learning how to play well together. They don't all have to love each other or even like each other, but they have to learn how to play well together. So there are people like me that are in all kinds of situations, and my heart goes out to my colleague that does this work with the people who are trying to learn how to work together so that they can successfully go to Mars.
Wow. Randy, from from what you wanted when you were young until what you are doing now, there's a huge difference in between. So we want to figure out how life, lead you to do what you do. Though, can you share? Why did you choose to become a social psychologist first, though?
Well, I started out in a program many years ago at Georgetown in my first degree, where we actually did our undergraduate work part of the time, and then you got to take some classes at the medical school part of the time. And so I thought I wanted to be a medical doctor. There were a lot of things that were good about that program. There were also a lot of things that I don't think were as good. There were several universities in the US that had some programs like that. They were pretty competitive and cutthroat. And after my second year, I went, this isn't really what I want to do. And what I did is I broadly found the social sciences, sociology, psychology, a little political science, but I became very interested in sociology and psychology. And then I chose, as I was finishing school, I chose to go on to graduate school. And I wanted to study really the impact of the individual on the group and the group's impact on the individual, sort of that interplay. And that's the playground for social psychologists. And I'm fascinated by people's behavior and trying to understand behavioral patterns and why people do what they do. Not so much like some of my colleagues. Most people, when you say psychologist, they think of a clinician, and they confuse psychology and psychiatry, and obviously there's a blend and an overlap. But I'm interested more in the application of psychological principles in a setting, like in an organizational setting. So if the two of you are in a team, yes, I'm interested in each of you, but I'm also interested in how you work together, how you fit together, how you make the team, who's probably many more than just the two of you, how do you all come together and how do you work together? And I'm curious about that, almost like Margaret Mead, as an anthropologist, was curious about how societies and culture, how a culture might develop. Same thing.
But Randy,
does that make sense to you?
Yes, that makes sense to me. What made me curious about that is that was 40 plus years ago, right? Why did you have
Yeah,
that
yeah.
curiosity for knowing the impact that individuals having on teams and team having and impact on individuals, and keep having that desire of knowing and learning for that many years until
Well,
now?
and that's myself now taking the template that's in my head and applying it to the things I was interested in back then.
Mm.
But I don't think it wasn't as formulated as that back then. What I was first interested in was understanding social policy.
Oh.
So I want you to think about Western democracy, liberals. For many people like me, we were very interested in changing the world. We were very interested in what could social policy do to make life better for other human beings.
Mm.
And that was actually the first set of questions. Providing people a basic income, good housing, food, those sorts of things. My early introduction to the social sciences were really around doing things that helped people to improve themselves or to better themselves.
Mm.
That sort of idea began to evolve when later in my graduate studies, I realized that if you were in poor health, if you did not have good health,
Mm.
it was harder for you to get a job, harder for you to make money, harder for you to better yourself. So the issue then is, how do we create a society where we both take care of people
Mm.
and make it possible for people to improve themselves? So those were sort of the early social science questions for me. Then I began to become more interested in who has talent and how is that talent identified and how do we help to build that talent. And there's one thing I want to add. Not just people who have money or resources.
Mm.
Sometimes, many times people are very talented, but they don't have resources. They don't have money, or maybe they lack an education, or maybe they don't have family connections. So how did those people get identified and how did they get to improve themselves and become better?
And for that many years, what was your answers to that, Randy?
Well, the answers, there's not a straight line of, okay, here are the three answers, go do this.
Mm.
Where I've ended up is, it's been in the last several years that we've begun to understand that certain people, because of their skin color or their gender or certain characteristics about them, get a ticket, if you will, to play in a tournament.
Mm.
So I like the notion of the tournament model of leader development.
Mm.
That sometimes you get a ticket to play, and some people get a ticket to play because they're the right gender, men, they're the right color, white. But I also, if you look at my work and where I've done some of my work and studies and done some teaching, I've also tried to be with people who aren't like me, who don't look like me, who maybe on the surface don't automatically get a ticket, to try to help to understand why they don't and what characteristics and strengths they bring to this wonderful tournament. So that's been the last many, many, many years. Certainly before we wrote Glass Ceiling, and I need to remind you, that was more than 25 years ago.
Wow.
I became very interested in, okay, I got it that white guys, especially in the West, get these tournaments. And a lot of times they've gone to the right schools, or they come from the right families or whatever. What about everybody else? So I became very, very interested in trying to create an environment and a society where everyone gets a shot.
Randy, we having some technical issue with the image of you because it's been frozen. Vivian, can you see Randy is moving?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, from my end, I don't see it. Can you help us by turn off the camera and put it back on? Is that okay, Randy?
Sure, I can do that.
Yes, sorry.
I can do that. Let me see if I can do that. I'm going to turn the camera off. Turn camera off. Okay, camera's off. And now I'm going to turn it back on.
Okay.
Now, can you see me move?
Yep.
There you go. Okay, sorry about that.
No, I don't know what happened from my end, but Vivian still can see you. So I think my computer doesn't like me tonight. So. Randy. Yeah. Go ahead, Vivian. Sorry.
I have a question for Randy. Randy, you share is very very, very good learning for myself that to know a bit about you, and also for yourself with all the privilege you get, you still think of the others, you still think of the leftover or the voices that are not able to be heard. I'm just curious, is that something from your upbringing time? How did you get that kind of thinking?
That's a really good question. Maybe it's partly my upbringing, some lessons I learned from my parents. It's possible it was also part of my education. I went to an all-boys Catholic school, and then I went to Georgetown where the Jesuits are, and it's the notion of being in service and making a difference in life. I don't know exactly one particular thing, Vivian, that created that, but it is something that I think is very, very important. And certainly in North America today and other parts of the world, it's an incredibly important thing. I'm not saying I'm always good at it. I'm a human being. I certainly have my biases and faults and flaws. But I do think that for organizations to be truly effective, we have to think of the voices that aren't in the room too. So I liked your notion when you said hearing all voices and getting all the voices in the room. It's really important.
With that being said, Randy, it appeared that over the years there was many voices not being heard in the room. And that creating, during the pandemic, there's a lot of people realize that, their works becoming not matters, and they would want to do something that more meaningful for their lives. And that's why we saw the Great Resignation happen around the world, right? Yeah. What happened to us back then that we didn't even, pay well attention to the voice of everybody?
I think I think in organizations, many organizations, certainly those Western European, North American based, it really is sort of a bit of a survival of the fittest. Most of the rules for how we behave and what gets rewarded are very sort of hierarchical, top down. The culture sort of it rewards a kind of achievement it's all sort of centered, I want to call it leader centric. It's all about that person. It's person centric. It's all about me. And I think we're discovering all kinds, a much broader notion of leadership. The humble leader, the inclusive leader, the leader who is the servant for her people. So there are many types and styles of leadership. I'm not saying they just appeared. I'm saying they were there, but I think we're noticing, paying more attention, and I also believe more organizations are trying to promote the notion of the humble leader and the servant leader. I found a paper not too long ago. It was dated 2016, and it's the first time I had seen a reference to the humble leader. Now, when you pick out many leaders, particularly Western-based leaders, we don't have much of a notion of humility. But yet, when you talk about from around the world, leaders who are beloved by their people, whether it's political leaders or corporate leaders, they have a streak of humility, a streak of giving, and I think that's really important. I think over the next few years we'll know more about that.
What's the article you mentioned is about coming from Edgar?
Coming from, the idea is the humble leader or the inclusive leader. Inclusive leader seems to be something primarily from Asia, as a matter of fact, in some papers that I've just read, is this notion of truly involving others and being able to have decision-making that is led by the leader but jointly agreed upon by all the others in the room. Don't you think that sounds like a wonderful way to lead? It's also very time-consuming, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure that, for leaders, the thing that costs them the most is the time, right? They have so many things to do in a very limited amount of time, just like everybody else. And maybe that's the reason why, the decision making was like fast forward, and by some people, not everybody was included. So if leaders these days want to change and and welcoming more people onto the table, how can you think that they need to do to start that baby step of changing though?
Well, we know from the research literature, and I was just going to grab something so I could show you something. Sorry, but I wanted to show you. So we started writing. This is a book that we wrote in Chinese, and here's another one. These are books about dealing with uncertainty. And when we wrote these for Financial Times, when we wrote them, we started to write about, I did this with my British colleague, Phil Hodgson, who's from Ashridge in the UK. We started to write about the leader, male or female, who is willing to admit what they don't know. They're willing to run into uncertainty, searching for a competitive advantage. Now, if a leader is willing to admit what she or what he doesn't know, then what they're really doing is they're willing to include others in, as you say, the decision-making process and get as many people involved as they explore the future. How do we go into this uncertain future? I think that's something people have to learn how to do. And we also know that the best leaders today are good learners. They're hungry to learn. And they're willing and hungry to learn from anyone, anywhere. And I think that's really, in 2022, that's really the secret for really great leadership. And guess what? The leaders who are hungry and willing to learn and are humble and maybe aren't packaged the way leaders have always been. Now I go back to the characteristics of male and white, and they come in all shapes and sizes, genders. They cross all kinds of categories. They're not what some societies have traditionally put up as leaders. They come from everywhere, and they can come from humble origins as well as from very rich families or whatever.
So beside the hungry and willing to learn, what else that you see in common from them, though?
They create a space where others can they create a space where others can excel.
Mm.
So if I were to tell you, what do I think? And these are in no particular order, but you're sparking in me sort of some of the things I'm dealing with now in my work. The first thing is, how well does someone learn? How much are they willing to admit that they still need to learn, grow, and change? The real thing that leaders need is this willingness to learn and grow and change and be willing to do that. The second thing is they need to run toward the uncertainty in the environment, not run away from it. You mentioned the pandemic. The pandemic created lots of uncertainty. The best leaders ran toward it looking for the opportunities. The third thing that I think that leaders who are very successful need to understand is they're full of strengths, but our greatest strengths can be our greatest weaknesses. And we need to understand that, and we need to staff to our weaknesses, not to our strengths. We don't need to clone ourselves. We need to be self-aware and open, willing to admit what we're good at, and we also need to be willing to staff around ourselves with people who are able to deal with the uncertainty and confusion in ways that we can't. So they complete us, or they complement us in some way. There are probably some other characteristics that might stand out. I would tell you that many leaders that I see are very book smart. We know that EQ matters, self-awareness, empathy, but tacit knowledge, street smarts, practical intelligence, call it whatever. It's the ability to have fungible skill. I can put you into an area you don't know very much about, and you can make sense of the leadership challenges and what needs to happen. There are some authors who write about that. There's a guy by the name of Sternberg who does some writing about practical intelligence, and that's key. To be optimistic, to have a belief in a better future, to have a belief in others is critically important. There's a guy by the name of Seligman that writes about learned optimism. And it is interesting, I don't mean to be, the Western word I would use would be Pollyanna-ish, to just have on rose-colored glasses, but I think a leader has to be optimistic, has to believe in the goodness of people and in, another day. So those are some of the kinds of things that I try when I'm working with leaders to try to help them think about. Some of those things get measured and discussed. Some of those things don't get measured and discussed today in organizational life.
Randy, thanks for sharing that. And then the piece of optimism is very important. We all know the importances of, thinking positively, be optimistic about the future, about things around us. But the issue is there's so many things happen that sometimes we lose track of what we think we need to know best to stay positive, right? So for those leaders that you've been working with, is there any secret from their personality, their works, their talents that can help them to stay optimistic for despite all the challenges they've been facing?
Yeah, I think every leader needs a place where he can speak frankly and where they can sort of unload. I think to lead in an organization, whether it's a family business or it's a great big corporation, I think leaders need to have a safe place, a safe space in which to be able to talk frankly and talk about what their worries and concerns are, because we do expect our leaders to be optimistic. I realize there are some mentalities. There are some things that leaders need to face that sometimes drag them down and stop them from being optimistic. They have to figure out a way to work those out in another part of their life. You know, they need a safe space in which to talk those things out. Because I think when they're with the rest of the organization, they have to believe in what we are capable of doing. And when people express doubts, when people say, oh, that's impossible, yes, they have to still believe that regardless of how difficult the situation they're in, that it is possible to achieve what the organization needs to achieve for its success. They have to believe that. And I think the best leaders that I see, the most effective, have a way of, whatever their doubts are, of being able to be honest with themselves, reflect on those doubts, and they have a safe space or a safe person to talk with about that. There's one other thing you just reminded me, and especially since the Queen just passed away. The very best leaders not only have a sense of themselves, they have a sense of history. They often read widely. They try to understand trends from other parts of the world, from other situations, and they're always searching for the applicability of what can I learn from this story or this situation, this issue that would help me understand my organization, my people, what I'm doing. So they have a sense of history, they have a sense of their place and their organization's place in it. And I guess the other thing that goes with the humility that I was speaking about before, they don't take themselves too seriously. They have a light touch. They have a light touch. And of course, the humble leader, it's never about him or her. It's always about everyone else.
Wow. Randy, for that, sorry, go ahead, Vivian.
Randy, if I have a question, earlier you mentioned about leader show a little bit of vulnerability.
Yes.
And while share it out to the community, so why do they need an extra empty space to show it even more?
I think so showing vulnerability allows people to see the leader for who she or he is, to realize, you know, leading is an honor, it's a privilege, it is service, and to show that you are not perfect allows others to also reflect on the fact they're not perfect either. And I often use the notion that the leader has to model growth and learning. And remember, we grow and learn when we make mistakes. We grow and learn when we don't know something. We grow and learn because we lack something. We lack some understanding or some experience or whatever. I think the vulnerability is being willing to show that you are human and that you're in the process, you're learning. Where I do think sometimes that the leader needs to be careful and have a private space, when we're trying to drive change, there are always going to be people with doubts. And I think the leader has to be willing to absorb other people's criticism and doubts. And even when they have their own doubts, I think sometimes they could admit, yes, I'm concerned too. But I think they have to, they might express, I have the same concerns, or I'm concerned about that issue too. I believe that we can overcome, or we can get there, and that's why I'm saying I think sometimes a leader needs a private space to work those things out. If a leader comes in and is very negative, If a leader comes in and is so, oh gosh, I don't know, or so indecisive, it's very hard for that person to rally the people to achieve more than they thought they could. But the leader could privately go, this is going to be really hard. I've got to figure out how to get everyone committed to this course of action. I know it will be hard, but it is not impossible. If they felt like it was a little bit impossible, I hope they had a place to work that out. I wouldn't want them to come in the room and say, well, this is really tough and maybe it's impossible. I want them to believe we can do it. That's all.
Thanks, Randy. Hey, you've been traveling the world, right, and meeting a lot of leaders, helping them to grow and make improvement for their lives and their organizations that they are leading. Is there any major concerns that you can see commonly from these leaders in leading organizations and their people these days, Randy?
My biggest concern has, well, I have a couple of concerns. One concern is I'm worried that there are certain leaders operating in the world who make it okay to shine the spotlight on themselves. It's all about me. You know that expression? It's all about me. The psychological term we might use is narcissism. I worry about that. I worry that we're seeing that with certain political leaders that I won't name. And I find it scary, and I'm worried that some of these narcissists who are somewhat autocratic in their leadership style seem to promise instant fixes, instant gratification to their followers. And it's easy for the followers to believe that following that leader will get them some sort of good result. I worry about that. I'm concerned about that because some of those leaders are very good communicators. They have some charisma. People end up following them. Sometimes leaders who have warts, who are imperfect, who are softer spoken, who are more kind and gentle, but also determined, are not always the ones that look as attractive, on a big stage. But yet they're the leaders we can count on, who will put followers first, who will deliver. But I want you to hear me carefully, and I want to be very clear. I worry about the narcissists who get a lot of press, and they look sometimes very attractive, but I think they're problematic.
Do they have still many of them like that, or small number of them in organization?
There are still some in organizations, and then when those find their way into the political environment, they're problematic. But there are still organizations that tolerate the narcissism, because in organizational life there's always a tension. I started to make a little 2x2 table with my hands. There's always a tension between how well you perform and your behavior. And in many organizations, because of shareholder value, stock valuation, reputation of the organization, some organizations around the world, country to country, tolerate sort of authoritarian behavior, or they tolerate sometimes some bad behavior, because that bad behavior gets results in good organizational performance. And we have a tendency around the world to overvalue organizational performance to the detriment of behavior. And that's a problem. And I hear, name the country, and if I've been there and taught a class, or we've done some consulting. I hear this story over and over and over again, where someone with not very good behavior is tolerated because they give the organization great performance, and the supervisory board or the shareholders or someone, applaud that person, but the workers, the people who are in the organization, don't like the way they're treated.
So with the great resignation happen everywhere at the moment, would that create some alerts or alarms for organization to start to change and correct those behavior, the corner of the behavior and performance, to make sure that the new way of leaders needs to be transformed and implemented?
What a timely question. I've been in so many things, both like this, where I'm doing the talking and also in the audience listening as different people are talking about this. You would think that the Great Resignation would make certain boards and individuals stand back and go, oh, we must account for this bad behavior. But my honest answer is I don't know if that's happening or not. I still see places where certain kinds of behavior that we probably don't want is still tolerated. I believe what's happening, to your point, is we're talking about it more. We're talking about more this problematic behavior, and could we address it? Should we address it? How could we address it? Because it's driving people away. It's driving some of our talented people away. We've seen that primarily in some of the high-tech companies, and they're the ones that have gotten press about, I guess it's called bad boy behavior, and it's driven some of their workers away, but not enough.
Wow.
But I still see this in all kinds of organizations where behavior that the three of us would say, that's not very good behavior, it's sort of tolerated. People literally look the other way and reward the executive anyway, or the executives anyway, because they get great stock performance.
Well, sorry, I thought that, in my belief, it's getting a lot better. So now, with your opinion, there seems to be a lot more works for us to do to make the change, though.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't want to I don't want to overstate and say, oh, it's not getting better at all. I think it's getting better, but I still see enough of it. And if the two of you were to come to some of my classes, whether they're in France or in Qatar or whether Canada or wherever, this still comes up as part of when we're talking about leadership behavior and when we're doing leader development in the classroom with younger leaders. They often bring these things up to talk about, well, I see so and so, and he or she gets rewarded, and boy, if I behave that way, so it's still there. That's all I'm saying.
Randy, I have two last questions for you tonight. Okay. And the first question is the question that Vivian and I always ask our experts, because we are in the quest of finding the how people think. So every time that we had a chance to talk to people who really deep thinker, big thinker like you are, we want to ask this question: Randy, how can you help yourself to expand your ability to think?
Your ability to think. Most people's biggest fear is change. Actually, I like to tease people and say, many people are afraid of heights, like being on a mountain and looking down. Many people are also afraid of making a speech, being in front of a bunch of people. But the thing that I find as adults we're all afraid of is change. We're afraid of change. Because when we know how to do something, we really know how to do it, and we don't want to change because it's scary I might be doing something that's different.
Mm.
And if I do something that's different, I might make a mistake.
Mm.
But mistakes are an opportunity to learn.
Mm.
Mistakes are an opportunity to say, okay, I did that wrong. Let me try again. And so I think the biggest issue is finding a way to be more comfortable with change. When we wrote Relax, It's Only Uncertainty, which is what these books are that I showed you, when we wrote Relax, It's Only Uncertainty, one of our biggest messages across the different styles of leadership is the ability to learn, grow, and change is key. And of course, when you address change, which we're all afraid of, that is a way to learn, grow, and change. And that expands your horizon. To be a learner. Too many people equate learning to being in school. When if you stop learning, you're dead. And by the way, my challenge, if the people in my company can learn faster than the people in your company, I will beat you in the marketplace.
Absolutely.
So think about that. Learning is a leadership characteristic. It is also a strategic competency. If we learn faster in our company than you do, we'll beat you in the marketplace. So that's the way I would answer your first question. What's the second?
So
I'm feeling pretty good now because I answered your question.
I wrote it down because I really like that answer. If your pupil can learn faster and better than the other company, basically our company will beat that other company. So that makes the role of the team, the HR team and the leadership team more seriously about how they can grow and help people in their organization to grow, and they need to have that conviction, believe that that's their role as a leader to make that change, and that made me so enjoying of what you share. But Randy, the second question that also is the last question is this: we know your past. You want to be an astronaut. You play musicians and everything, right? And we know the current works that you do. You teaching, you do, developing people, developing leaders and teams, and make them, make great organizations, right? We want to know a little bit about the future of what you do, also, Randy. Is there anything exciting that you are doing that you can share with us so Vivian and I and the audience can celebrate with you in advance?
Well, I have a colleague in Canada who is currently using our instrument called the Ambiguity Architect. It is a way to help people understand how well they deal with the uncertainty in the fast-moving world that we live in. I actually believe one of the most critical things is the ability to deal with ambiguity and the uncertainty that you experience as part of dealing with ambiguity. He is piloting more of this instrument's been around, but he's piloting it, and we're finding that the more preliminary results, the more effective leaders seem to deal better with ambiguity, and they see the uncertainty as a sort of necessary, I don't want to call it a necessary evil, but it sort of comes with the territory, and an effective leader and her team navigate that uncertainty in order to get to a better end place. It's an opportunity, again, it's an opportunity to learn. So we're working on that. I'm looking over to my right. I have a manuscript over here from another colleague who's writing a very practical leadership book, and he's asked me to read it and comment on it. And then I continue to work with several organizations, healthcare, defense industry, financial services, others. I am excited at this point that we are finding leaders that don't look just like me. They look like other people in the world, the two of you, other people who might tune into this, they are much more diverse, they're much more inclusive, they're much more accepting. There is a school teacher who passed away when the Challenger, remember the Challenger, since you liked being an astronaut, the Challenger went up, but it blew up. The Challenger was going to go into space, and there was a school teacher named Krista McAuliffe who was going to teach a science lesson from space, but it blew up and she never taught the lesson. She had a little slogan. Her slogan was, "I touch the future, I teach."
Wow.
I want you to think about that. So when you say the future, my future happens every day when I'm consulting or when I'm teaching. I touch the future, I teach.
Wow.
And that's the future. The best future is every day when I get to work with, whether I call them clients or students or whoever they are, I touch the future, I teach.
Well, Randy, I really, really love that sentence. I touch the future, I teach, right? And thanks for the work for people like you that can help leaders to change and create better environments for the employees so that they can work happily, they're coming home a happier person, and their dining tables can have a fruitful conversation about because they're happy. So they make the next generation go into work um, optimistically about the future, about works, and about about everything. So thank you for doing that, and we wish you a great health. We wish you all the best, so that you can always contribute more to make the future that you teach. Okay.
Thank you. It's an honor to do this with the two of you. I'm very honored. Thank you very much for letting me bang on. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you so much.
And like we said earlier, if you ever travel to these countries, now you have the two new friends. Vivian and I, your friend, will take you around town. Okay.
I would love to. Thank you very much. Thank you for including me in this.
Thank you.
See you.
See you. You have a nice
Bye.
day. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Vivian too.